Hello everybody and welcome back to CaiKeys. Today I'm here with the Citroen C5. This is a car that I have been wanting to review for a while. It's a Citroen. Obviously, I've got a little bit of a checkered past with Citroens on the CaiKeys channel, but this is a Citroen C5, a Citroen made in the time when they weren't shit. So let's give it a go and let's see how fantastic it is. What does that button mean? Oh, was that was an airbag warning, but it's okay.
So, yeah.
That's all good. That was a crunch. I'll wait for this Yaris to go past. Whoa, okay, so here we are behind the wheel of the Citroen C5. It has been lent to me very kindly by Jack, who has come up all the way from the Midlands, Birmingham way. There's the north, which is Manchester and Leeds. The Midlands is all Birmingham as far as I'm concerned, and the south is all London. So anyway, he's came up from many a mile away to lend me this Citroen C5 to review for you guys, so massively appreciate it. And let's really get into it. You've heard the story behind it. You've heard when he purchased this car. He purchased it about 3 months ago from some chap who used this as a removal van. I don't really want to go over it too much, but the fact of the matter is this is his first car and it's a little bit of an oddball choice, and here at CaiKeys we like our oddball choices. It might look like a fairly conventional, fairly boring family hauler to you, but it's not. It's still got its little French quirks and features. French cars from like the 1950s all the way to the 1990s were absolutely bizarre. They always had something really weird about them. Mostly the hydraulics, but they always did something very strange, like the Citroen CX with its indicators on here, or the BX, well, all Citroens really, with their strange single spoke steering wheel. And if you've ever driven one, it really takes some getting used to, because half of them are off center, so it feels like you're driving and the alignment's totally wrong. Like French cars, they've always said, okay, let's find a diagram of a car. Right, okay, it needs 4 wheels, it needs a steering wheel. No, okay, what can we do differently? And that's what I really appreciate about the things. I had a Peugeot 406 a few years ago. I got it in COVID for £600, and to this day it's the best car I have ever owned. And I can't really put my finger on exactly why. I think it was just the fact that it was stunning. It was a pre-facelift 406 in green. It was an LX trim with like a beige interior. It was a gorgeous car. I think it was the fact that I bought the car because I needed it, and I came into it with this sense of, it's a French car, it'll probably do me for some time, but you know, it is what it is. It won't be brilliant, and it just surpassed all my expectations. I mean, being English, I've kind of got a duty to disparage French things, but I cannot hide my love of French vehicles. I think they're generally fantastic. And a French HDI engine is one of the most indestructible things ever created. What I am going to do, I've been nice while Jack was in the car, but this is going away because there is nothing worse than a steering wheel cover. It's horrible. It's like a condom for the wheel. And it uncovers the hilariously plasticky French steering wheel, which the 406 also had. On the plus side, these things don't actually wear, but they're very... ugh. As far as ergonomics go on this car, Jack said that this is based on the same platform as the 406. It's a very similar car. I will have to confirm that, although there are a hell of a lot of similarities, so I'd assume that he's probably right. It doesn't feel like the 406 ergonomically to drive. One thing that's really been bothering me with this car, and I can see as being genuinely quite problematic if you're taller than me, and you probably are because I'm about 2 foot tall. It's the clutch. The clutch on this car is on its way out, admittedly, but the pedal itself sits so ridiculously high that you have to kind of step onto it to depress it. And it's really inconvenient. I mean, Jack was saying earlier prior to us recording that what he ended up doing when he first owned this car really was he rested his foot on the clutch a fair bit, which obviously started burning the thing out. And I can understand why he would, because my God, it's like climbing a flight of stairs every time you want to change gear. I've never really understood when people go, manuals are too much effort in traffic. No, this one is. My leg's already beginning to ache. Aside from that, though, lots of people complained about the brakes on this kind of being on or off. I'm not really feeling that. They just feel like fairly conventional brakes. Accelerator has a little bit of that on-off feel, but to be fair, when it's on, you're making about 2 brake horsepower. This is certainly not a fast vehicle. That being said, you don't really go into one of these for speed. If you're looking at a Citroen C5, you're going to be looking at something. Why is it beeping at me? I've lost bloody recording again. You know what? This GoPro's useless. I'm going to have to pull over and start recording again. I was on a roll there and all. The Citroen C5, you're probably going to get a diesel if you're going to get one of these vehicles, because it's the sensible choice. As far as power goes, there's the 1.6 litre diesel, the 2 litre diesel, and the 2.2 litre diesel. This is the 2 litre diesel, kicking out around 110 horsepower. There were 2 states of tune for it, around a 96 horsepower, around 110, 114 I believe it was. You're gonna go for the 2 litre diesel, most likely, and you're probably going to want to get it with the 114 brake horsepower. This has been remapped. I don't know if I should be saying that. This may or may not have been remapped, and apparently that's the kind of it changes the fuel mapping, and it's to kind of iron out a lumpy spot around the 2,000 to 3,000 RPM mark. I can't tell you if that's done a good job, but power delivery does seem quite consistent. I do like these HDI engines. They're solid. They don't tend to go wrong. You keep these things serviced and they will outlive you. People always go, oh, you know, get an old BMW diesel. Fantastic, yeah, they're great. But don't overlook the French cars. They get a bad rep, but it's a very undeserved rep. What we're going to do, we're going to take this car up into the countryside, and we're gonna take it around a few country roads, and I'm going to show you how it handles, really. The thing about this car is, I mean, as I was saying earlier, French cars in the 1980s and 1970s especially were bizarre. They were completely mental. They had weird, bizarre styling quirks, features, always something a little bit odd, like the buttons on the dashboard, the oddly shaped steering wheel. I've been through all of that, but in the late 1990s, even with things like the Xantia, they began to kind of calm down a little bit. They'd done their crazy, wacky, experimental drug phase, and they'd kind of settled into being responsible, productive members of society, but occasionally they still like to have, they like to dabble in their weirdness. There's some kind of metaphor here, but I don't really know what I'm going for. Something to do with, I don't know, a middle-aged drug user or something. The fact of the matter is, the Citroen C5 still has those weird quirks, despite the fact it's a hell of a lot more conventional than something like the Citroen BX, which really was weird. Here in the middle of the center console, you have 2 buttons, and on the instrument cluster you have 4 icons, and as you've guessed, that is to adjust the suspension. So you have 2 modes really that you can be used for driving. You've got the normal mode, which flashes green and has a little underline to let you know this is the mode you should be driving on, or you can put that up and then you've got the off-road mode, well, for bumpy terrain really, which is great for getting onto curbs. This is electronically controlled, unlike the old ones which had a lever by the handbrake. And what that means essentially is if you're going to start damaging things, like if you start driving in off-road mode or service mode for that matter, which you shouldn't do, it will say no, you are not to do that, and it will put it down to the normal ride height. That's a very German thing to do, actually. A French car you'd expect to be a little bit more permissive. So anyway, we're in normal driving mode, and that's what you will be for most of the time. These things hunker down a little bit on the motorway, so you've got that extra control. But it's really not an invasive system. It's a cool party trick. As you can see, you can raise the car and you can lower it, and that's fun for about 5 minutes. And these things look kind of good when they're fully lowered. As far as reliability goes of these hydraulic systems, the older Citroens did used to have problems with the rubber pipes. They'd crack, they'd get brittle, and if anyone's got a Citroen BX or anything like that, there's a particular pipe. It's sort of like a reservoir for all the other pipes. It's called the Octopus, and if you want to change that, book a day off work and get yourself a 6-pack of beer, because you're going to need it. These seem to be fairly trouble-free. It's a little bit of a simpler system than the ones that you used on like the BX. Although Jack was telling me that in the higher spec versions of these cars, there is a sport button on this height controller, and essentially what that sport button does is it just stiffens up the suspension a little bit. Harkening back to the Xantia Activa, of course it's not as complex as that. That thing had about 25 million spheres, and it always remained completely upright, and the cornering ability of that car was absolutely unmatched. But you know, it's good. So what makes these cars so dirt cheap? Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's just that French reputation. If you come from another country, if you're not from England, then please tell us what your country's general consensus on French cars is, because over here, I mean, we historically look, it's fun to make fun of the French, and I'm all for it. I'll throw croissants at people, or orange, I don't know. We typically, we don't like them, but what's that man doing on the road? The fact of the matter is, I've got to hand it to them, they make some fantastic vehicles. Always something a little bit interesting. And look, I think that there might be a reason that the French still do have a car industry whilst we don't. The phrase glass houses springs to mind. So here we can put our foot down a little bit and nothing really happens. That being said, power delivery is smooth, suspension is crunchy. I don't know what just crunched, but we've got some worn ball joints on this anyway, which are squeaking. You know what I'm going to do? Whilst I've got this car, I think why not make the most of it? So we're going to take it up to the Volvo's residence, and we're going to ask our expert Volvo owner what he thinks of the vehicle. Oh no, another vehicle. I have been told actually that it's perfectly fine if I start like knocking wing mirrors off and stuff. So whilst I was accelerating there, what I noticed is what Jack was telling me earlier. This vehicle does not seem to have the correct rev gauge. It does, but it seems like a standard amongst the C5 model. There's no actual red line printed on there, so it's kind of absolutely useless. And it's apparently also inaccurate, because apparently the OBD is reading a completely different reading to whatever the instrument panel is. Right, this road is horrific for potholes. It really is terrible. So we're going to take it over here at a moderate speed and see exactly what happens. Jack, if you get a flat tyre on the way back, I apologise. It's so impressive. We have to go over that in my girlfriend's new Hyundai Veloster, and even in my Yaris we have to go over that at about 10 miles an hour, and this, it just soaks it up. You can just like kind of glide over them. Like, yeah, you feel the road, but my god, there's a reason that Rolls-Royce used Citroen's hydraulic suspension in their cars, because it's so impressive. Citroen need to bring this back, and it's a shame that Citroen are really just Peugeot by any other name. Look, I know that Peugeot have owned Citroen since I believe the 1970s, but they had their own brand identity. They were different. Citroens had the cool suspension, they had the bizarre styling, whereas Peugeots were always a little bit more conventional. Bring back weird Citroens. The Ami is a fantastic start, and I would love to drive one, but that's not a serious vehicle, is it? Jack's enjoying a Wetherspoons meal actually with Ethan right now, so I hope you're enjoying that, because I'm certainly enjoying driving your C5. I think you've done really genuinely well. Jack was looking for a Rover 75. He was ideally looking for a manual. He had to have a manual with the 2-litre diesel he was looking at, similar to the one that I reviewed, which is now deceased. It's lying in my garden waiting for the scrapyard. Right now it's kind of a bit of a shed for Yaris parts. But honestly, right, look, interior styling in this is not as good, but that being said, it's probably comfier. You've got this fantastic velour upholstery, which is so comfortable, it's unbelievable. You've got a fairly nice cab. If you're tall, you might have a few issues, because the windscreen is very steeply raked in here, but I'm not, so it's okay. And for £600, I don't think you can do much better than this. I hate to say it, I really do hate to say it, because I love my Yaris, but for £600, £50 cheaper than the Yaris, this is a far better vehicle objectively. It's bigger, it's more refined, it's cooler. What's this button do? Nothing. This looks like this is a button for the boot. I don't know if this is the tailgate button that Jack was on about, the split tailgate, but whatever it is, in typical French fashion, it doesn't work. Got me wanting one myself now, and I always say that about cars I like, but honestly, if I bought every car I liked, I'd have about 50 million different cars. So I do actually need to make a minor correction about what I said previously. I said that this may have been the same platform that was used on the 406. It's not. It was the PSA P, I've just forgotten the name, so it's going to be here, PFA platform. Anyway, it was the successor to that platform. The Citroen C5 was actually the first vehicle made on this new platform, but also the Peugeot 407 was also on this platform, which is essentially pretty much the same vehicle. Explains why it feels similar in a way, but it's not the same. So the Citroen C5 was produced between 2000 and 2007, and the second generation was produced after that, 2008 until about 2015, I want to say. They're not a car that you really hear that much about. The second generation Citroen C5 actually was kind of a little bit disappointing in the way that not all of them had the hydraulic suspension. Lots of the lower spec models actually just had fairly conventional suspension, which is a little bit disappointing. After all, that's what really separated Peugeot from Citroen. I don't really understand what niche Citroen fills anymore. What we're going to do, we're going to drive into town, I reckon, and oh, there's a horse. You know what? I've been trying to think about who exactly this car is for, and I think I have the answer. There's an awful lot of demand, really, from people who kind of know their stuff about cars for just something cheap, something that gets them from A to B, and something that they can haul things in. And I think the go-to choice generally for that is something like a Ford Mondeo Estate. Maybe you should consider one of these instead, because I think this might be the better choice. It's just as reliable, just as spacious. The electrics admittedly are not as good, and the ergonomics are not great, but it's a comfortable car. For longer journeys, this thing is unbeatable thanks to that suspension. I mean, it softens up bumps fantastically. I think it's a good car, but I've just discovered something on it which makes me reconsider all the praises that I've thrown this car's way. Something which I really think is unforgivable, and I shall show you now. Right, so this is a French car, yeah? If you know, you know. Absolutely unacceptable. And it's not the electrics. It's wrong. Absolutely inexcusable. So there you have it, the Citroen C5. A little bit of a more pedestrian car for Citroen, but it still has those quirks. And what's more, is it makes a perfectly suitable daily driver. A second car, a cheap car, just a little bit of a load lugger. It is what it is. It's French, but I like it.